I'm Dr. William Walsh, and I'm author of Retaining the Mind, How the Foods We Eat Affect Our Brain. Thanks to you for letting me come today and tell you about my work. Retain the Mind is actually the fifth book in a series of books that I authored as I struggled to identify the foods and beverages that cause my patients so much pain and distress. My previous books examined how our modern diet causes symptoms we think of as allergic. Retain the Mind look closely at how these same foods harm the brain. My first book, I should tell you a little bit before. What attracted me to the field of allergy is that there were so many people who have symptoms that when in medical school and in internship and so forth and in the service for a while, they would come to see me, and I had absolutely no idea where these symptoms were coming from, but I did not think that they were psychological, which was a popular diagnosis at that time. I thought they came from somewhere, and I had a feeling that it came out of the diet or the environment. It's the only way to answer them. So I started practice in 1970. In 1991, I put out my first book, and treating food allergy my way, and I brought it out again in 1993. In 91, I thought I really knew all about what was going on, and by 93, I convinced myself I really didn't, so I thought I better write this again, and I did. Also in 1993, I wrote Treating Sinus, Migraine, and Cluster Headaches, and the reason for that is that I saw a lot of headache patients in my practice, and if you will visualize migraine headaches, the cause of a migraine headache like I do, you'll see what I'm going toward. And that's that in our head there are arteries and nerves that go around supplying the head. And the nerves in many places are very close together. They're just tied right together. And the arteries, of course, are throbbing. And the nerves do just fine. They don't have any problems with that, except if the nerves get irritated or damaged. Then the throbbing of the artery against those nerves gives you throbbing pain, and that's the throbbing pain of migraine headaches. When I started out, I started to ask in practice, the first thing I'd ask people who had headaches, what caused them, and they kept telling me until I was able to build up a number of foods and beverages that did cause headaches. And as I grew more used to it, my patients, my practice got busier with migraine patients, and they did very well with that. That'll figure in a little bit later in this talk, but I thought I'd bring you up to that point. The next book I put out, again finding that in 1993 I didn't know everything, was 1995. And again, this time it was the food allergy book. And then I was going to, again, and about 2 years later, I thought that, I had learned again so much about foods and with how they were harming my patients, that I started to write a book again, but I decided to split it into two books, one about food allergy and one about food sensitivity. And I got a call, and I got about halfway through it. I got the first book done, and Wiley called, which is a publishing company, and I was very pleased that they wanted to put it out. And I said, oh, fine, I've got it all ready, the first book, and we'll get ready on the second book pretty soon. They said, no, we want it all in one book. And so I had to go back and rewrite the whole thing, and that's where in 2000, finally, we put out under Wiley, The Complete Guide to Understanding and Relieving Your Food Allergies. That did very, very well, as the other books did also very well. But it was a marked departure because before then, on the previous books, my thrust was how foods were causing allergy symptoms. And now I want, with the current book, Retaining the Mind, How the Foods We Eat Affect Our Brain, I switched entirely into how the mind is affected by our foods. And you'll see, I think, soon why I made that switch. You came to learn how to fight Alzheimer's disease, and I came today to tell you how to do it. To tell you about the foods that cripple severely and kill mercilessly. Although these foods seem harmless, they are not. They are vicious, and they affect everyone. They affect everyone in this room and outside this room. Now travel with me as I tell you about these foods. At one time, I was one of the few who understood their damage, but now many are awakening to what I will tell you today. During this talk, we will be focusing pretty much on Alzheimer's. And the reason for that is that it's a very common problem. By definition of the National Institute of Aging, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Alzheimer's is an irreversible and progressive brain disorder that slowly destroys memory and thinking skills, and eventually the ability to carry out the simplest tasks. That's pretty bad. It's irreversible and it's progressive. It's a sick-leading cause of death, and I think actually that it's even a more important cause of death than the sixth leading one, and I hope that I'll be able to show you that. It's the most common dementia among older adults, and that's somewhere around 60-70% of adults who have dementia have Alzheimer's variety. And to give you a definition of dementia, I'll be using the word. Dementia is the loss of thinking, of remembering, and of purposeful activities that interferes with a person's daily life and activities. But I don't want you to be frozen into the thought that migraine is the only condition of damaged nerves. There are all kinds of other problems. There were damaged nerves that cause all kinds of other problems. The reason that we're focusing on Alzheimer's is because it's the most common dementia and because it is the most studied. They have a wonderful organization that promotes studies, but it's not the only dementia. There's other dementias such as frontal temporal, vascular, and dementia with Parkinson's. And there are nerves that come out of the brain and go down into the arms and the legs, and necessitate the use of canes, walkers, and wheelchairs. And I don't think that there's a difference between, at least in how they react to our diet, I don't think there's a difference between the nerves in the brain and the peripheral nerves. I think that they may all share Alzheimer's causes and treatment. Now, so far what I've told you is a little bit depressing, irreversible, progressive. But there's one thing that's happening that really is cheering, and that's that Alzheimer is fading. It is not progressing as it would. At one time, we thought that Alzheimer's would completely continue to increase until the burden and the numbers of people with Alzheimer's would become such that we couldn't afford to take care of them anymore. But surprisingly, instead of increasing steadily, there's good evidence that Alzheimer's is decreasing, and I want to tell you why I think that occurs. But first of all, I think that you need to know why you're listening to me. You know, what authority do I have to discuss diet and Alzheimer's? Well, first of all, I'm a medical doctor. I went to Creighton Medical School in Omaha, Nebraska, and graduated as an MD. Followed that, I went into the Air Force as a general medical officer, and at the base where I was station, they had no allergy clinic, and I talked to the head of the program. I said, do you want me to start an allergy clinic? And he said, sure. So I started one. And I'm happy to say the clinic is still operating, so wonderful. But after getting in the service, I decided, hey, I've got to know more about what I'm doing. So I was accepted, thank God, to a wonderful allergy fellowship at the Mayo Clinic, and I think it's a premier allergy fellowship in the country. And after I was done with the Mayo Clinic, I then wanted to pass my boards. And I did pass the board, and I am certified as a specialist by the American Board of Allergy and Immunology. Did run into a little bit of a problem, though, in those boards. They really meant a lot, and I studied for months because not having the specialty certificate would be just a terrible blow. And so I went and took the test, and the test, 25% of the whole test was dermatology. And for dermatology, they took out little pictures of rashes on people. So pink rashes and pink skin, and they kept asking me, what do you think of that? I said, I can't see it. And it was one after the other. Obviously, I'd flunked 25% of the test, and the test was hard enough that I knew that I had messed up on other programs. I didn't get a 75% out of it. So I went home and told my wife, hey, I've got to do this all over again to go through all the studying and everything else. And then a couple of weeks later, I got the notice from the board, and I almost threw it away without opening it up. And I opened it up, and I had passed. And what I figured out is that nobody else knew what those pink rash on pink skin were. Okay, I'm a fellow of the American College of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology. And in my practice, I was a consultant allergist. I had no patients of my own. I simply treated patients who were referred to me by family doctors, internists, and pediatricians. And I took care of their allergy for them and sent them back. And during that time, as you probably are picking up the fact, I had this tremendous interest in foods and how they're harming us. Prior to retiring from a practice, I joined Health East. I started their allergy clinic, and that's still operating, so I didn't do anything bad there. And in fact, the person who runs it is a personal friend. So as far as why you're listening to me, I have qualifications to tell you why the diet is hurting you. That is my specialty. In allergy. The second thing is because I have Alzheimer's disease. And I should explain that a little bit. Why am I standing up here talking if I've got Alzheimer's disease? Well, there are 10, the only way that you know if you have Alzheimer's disease or not for sure is through a post-mortem or an autopsy, and I'm not ready for that yet. So we have to go with what we have, which is the Alzheimer's organization has 10 separate symptoms that can clue you to the point that you have Alzheimer's dementia. And I satisfied them, but the one that I satisfied the most was the number 6, which is new problems in writing or speaking. And what that means is that when you have Alzheimer's disease, one of the things that can go for you is your ability to talk well. My ability to talk well, I knew that was failing on me because I was getting to the point where if I started a long sentence, I couldn't get to the end of that sentence because I forgot the first part of the sentence. And so I got to be a real expert on the short sentence, like, hi, George, how are you doing today? How's the family? Nothing long, just something, a few words, and I don't think anybody realized how bad things were. And I refused to acknowledge that to myself. And that's one thing that is known by people who treat Alzheimer's, that one of the last people to know that you have dementia is the person affected. And what really hit me hard was that I had joined the board of the Ramsey County Library. And on this board, I was the chair for the program committee, and the program committee sponsored a spring luncheon. And it was my honor to introduce the speaker. And I knew before this, I knew it was coming up, and I thought, I'm really having trouble with talking. I think what I better do is memorize this little introduction. A little introduction is nothing. It just, this is a nice lady. She's an expert in her field. I heard her talk already, which I did. And she will entertain you well, and her name is so and so. Nothing, no problem with that. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't, I tried to memorize it, and it just wouldn't stick with me. So, okay, fine. I wrote it out, and my intent was to stand up and to introduce her and to read it right off the page if I couldn't remember it. And so it was at the Town and Country Club, North Oaks Country Club. Beautiful day, sun shining, 70 people sitting there waiting for the talk, and I stood up to give the talk, and I couldn't read what I had written. And I had to sit down, and she had to introduce herself, and this was humility. It was a catastrophe of unbelievable extent. Wow. And I said, Bill, you're really in trouble, and you better face it, because there's not much time left for you to try to come out of this. Let's drop that for a minute and go ahead to what you are probably wondering about now. What are these foods that are causing this much trouble? It's not really the foods themselves that cause the trouble, it's the chemicals in the food that are giving trouble. And the three chemicals that are giving the trouble are sugar, MSG, and citric acid. And I'm not going to go through each of them because the book, Retaining the Mind, lays those, it goes into detail on that, and we don't frankly have the time here with what I want to cover. I should stop for just a minute and talk about that, the identity of the book, Retaining the Mind. I wanted the book to read Retaining and Regaining the Mind, because there are two things we're trying to do. One is to stop the progression of dementia, and the other is to regain what you lost. And when I took it to the publishing house, they said, it's too long. I said, it's not too long. He said, yes, it is too long. Well, I go to the bar about once a week and just sit and have a little drink. It's a little social time and enjoy it. And I was sitting at the bar, and I looked at all the bottles up on the shelf in front of me, and I looked at the names on it, and all the names were one word, two words, and almost never three words. And I thought, these people pay millions of dollars in order to get a name. And the big name that they have is a short name. This is what the people are trying to tell me, keep it short. So I had to keep it short. But anyway, sugar has many different words, and you can see on labels, and going through a few: high fructose corn syrup, honey, table sugar, etc. MSG, just to give you a brief explanation of it, MSG takes up a considerable part of Retain the Mind because it is so important. But let me just give you a few hints of what it is all about. MSG stands for monosodium glutamate, and that stands for amino acid glutamic acid. And the body uses glutamic acid to build protein. It's an amino acid. And it's one of the most frequently used proteins in your body. And so it's very important. It also does a second thing that's very, very important too, and that's that it is totally essential in order to speed commands from your brain down to your limbs and your body, and to just speed impulses around your brain in order to make thoughts. In other words, if you decide to open and close your hand like that, your mind says it and then sends down through all the nerves that are involved down to the hand. So open up the hand, and then the nerves close the hand up again according to the body. And in the progression of that message going down, MSG, the amino acid that's so important, is assists in pushing the command onward. So it stimulates nerves to do what the body is and the brain is telling it to do. But that's also the bad part, because if the stimulation isn't stopped quickly, it can injure the nerve, and sufficient injuring will eventually bring it to problem. It will eventually first harm the nerve and then kill it. What's sufficient? Well, as we grow older, our ability to flush away MSG gets lower, and so there's more tendency for MSG to stay around the nerves too long and start to really bother them, particularly when we have it in the diet. We take food with a lot of MSG into our mouth and swallow it, and it goes throughout the whole body. So it's years of continual eating high MSG foods eventually starts destroying those nerves. The second thing that you see the danger of MSG is in a stroke. You know that if you have a stroke, that is very desperately necessary to get that artery unplugged. Otherwise, you're going to lose nerves. And there's two reasons you'd lose nerves. One is that the blood is no longer carrying oxygen to the nerves, and the nerves need oxygen, and they start dying because they just get hypoxic or lack of oxygen. The second thing is that there's no blood to carry away the MSG that's been released in that area, so it sits there and it keeps stimulating. So you have two effects on that nerves from a stroke, and I use that as an illustration of the harm that MSG can do. This is not a nice product, it's a dangerous one. When we're young, we can tolerate it without trouble. As we grow older, we become more and more sensitive to it. Okay, citrus is one that's really not often thought of as a bad chemical, but I'm going to let Retain the Mind go through why I think it is. But it is one of the reasons. Citrus has the ability to destroy nerves that are previously infected by viruses, like the herpes virus. And so that and under certain circumstances during our life, I think that there's times where the nerves are particularly affected by the herpes virus and more susceptible to the bad action of citrus on the nerve. So let's go on beyond that. So this is covered in some detail in Retain the Mind, and it does take a little bit of thinking in order to get your way through this whole thing. Okay, so why are we talking about foods? That seems an odd thing. You know, diet's not going to hurt anybody. That's just crazy to think that it does. Well, actually, there's good evidence that diet is very important. First of all, we know that the Mediterranean diet that's been looked at in a lot of studies, and it's a good diet as far as helping people live and live healthy and wonderful lives. Also, it significantly delays the onset of Alzheimer's disease. There is a second diet that does the same thing, that by a chance, well, I don't know if it's chance finding, but people on this diet also had delay in the onset of Alzheimer's disease. And the DASH diet stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. They had this diet primarily was to settle the high blood pressure on people who had a high blood pressure. And because both diets significantly delayed the onset of Alzheimer's disease, they said, hey, what if we threw the diets together? what would happen then. So they did, and they named it an impossible name, I think. The MIND diet. And the MIND diet, M stands for Mediterranean and DASH. Those are the two diets that I just talked about. Intervention for neurodegenerative delay, in other words, to slow down the onset of Alzheimer's disease. So all three diets avoid sugar and MSG. So again, going back to these two chemicals and how they could affect the onset of MSG. Closely following these diets significantly lowered Alzheimer's risk, and even moderate adherence to the MIND diet reduced the risk. In other words, some people who weren't exactly all dedicated to following it, yet even for them, there was a delay in Alzheimer's disease. And that's kind of interesting. You'll notice I left out fat. For many years, it was thought that fat was a prime cause of trouble in patients. Doctors looked at people who were overweight and found these people had significant problems, and they sought fat. It must be the fat in the diet that's doing it. And that carried on for years and years, and if anything else, it didn't allow people to understand what really was causing trouble. And so, just to tell you, I think that if you still have thoughts that fat are a significant cause, like of dementia and problems like that, that's not really well agreed on anymore. I have like 100 or more references in order to make that book. I've tried to track down everything that's been said about diet, and there's controversy still about some fats might be giving trouble, but other people are saying, hey, look, there's really no evidence that fat is causing that much trouble. But what the problem with fat is that it took people's minds away from what was really going on, which was that the sugar and the MSG in the diet was giving trouble, and their attention was instead focused on fat. Okay, what are the similarities? Why these three chemicals would cause this trouble? Most natural foods have little taste. And the food chemicals, MSG, citrus, and sugar bring good taste to foods. And the high levels that we find in many foods are not normal. And the reason that they're there is that one of the smartest people in the whole world put them there, and that's the farmers who cultivate various foods. They were smart enough to know if they had a walnut that tasted better than somebody else's walnut, their walnut sold better to the market. And this was encouraging the growth of that walnut tree and encourage your neighbor to come over and steal their walnuts and grow some of their own too. And we have that in so many other foods where there has been progressive development of the foods, better tasting, sweeter, and even foods like apples, pears, peaches, plums, nuts, and oranges have all been altered genetically through the years because of selective breeding. If food chemicals are causing trouble, how are they doing it? If we look at sugar, sugar disrupts homeostasis. Now that's a big word. Homeostasis means stability. All of us need our bodies need stability. We need stable blood pressure. If the blood pressure gets up to 150 over 110, that's not stable. We're in trouble. Blood pressure, lipids, sugar, We need stable, high-density lipoprotein. That's a lipoprotein that takes fat and moves it around the body into advantageous places. And we need stability in our insulin hormone. And when that varies up and down, all of these various things, when they become unstable, can lead to increased chance of diabetes. And there is a very definite tie between Alzheimer's and diabetes. The people with diabetes have an increased chance of having Alzheimer's disease. Also, sugar promotes abdominal obesity, and that's obesity around the tummy. Also, it packs the coronary and artery and the carotid arteries, the arteries to the brain, the arteries to the heart, with this fat. And so leading to myocardial infarctions and stroke, which is a show of how dangerous this chemical is. MSG, we already talked about that, how it can overstimulate and cause death to nerves by that. Citric acid, as the book will tell you, it affects nerves that have been previously injured by being chronically infected by herpes virus. And you see that particularly in people who have cold sores, right, lips and mouth. I'm very susceptible to that too. And I saw many people with that in my practice. And when you get a particular types of viruses, maybe a number of times a year, maybe 4 times a year, you start getting these little cold sores. Now, they can remain very small and unnoticeable if the person is not eating high quality quantities of citrus type of chemicals. But once you do, I can have cold sores that, in fact, before I knew what was happening, they would spread very large. And right now, if I had them, you wouldn't be able to tell because they start so small. One of the organs that contain nerves, in other words, the brain, almost all of us have chronic viral infections in the nerves, in the brain. And it is very possible that when these viruses occur and citrus is eaten and drunk at the same time, that we get a killing of nerve cells, and leading, I think is a major problem with dementia. There's also a theoretical one too, and that's the basic energy production in our body comes through what's called the citric acid cycle. And that cycle, is it possible that cycle can be damaged, and it's also possible that it can produce increased levels of MSG, because that's one of the steps in the citric acid cycle, is the conversion into a chemical like MSG. So you have some choices. Your choices are 2. The first one is that if you have, or if your loved one has symptoms of dementia, losing the ability to think, to talk, and so forth, you can submit and die gracefully. You have lived a full and happy life, and it's time to rest. And people who love you will help you prepare for the end, and you will enjoy delicious meals and snacks with sugar, MSG, and citric acid. In other words, it's a wonderful life, surrounded by friends. Great. Or you can fight it. If you do, it's not that nice. You will eat foods with little taste, because by the time that you're that affected, you're very severely affected, and you can't get by with much. You can't get by with much without harming yourself. And unfortunately, the diet change may only slow progression or may fail to help. But if you follow it, you have the chance to regain and retain your mind. I know that my own choice would always be to fight it. To give an illustration, at my funeral, I expect when I'm being hauled down the aisle that there's going to be 3 strong men holding down the lid on the coffin so I don't get out. So to me, submitting gracefully to this killer is not at all in my repertoire. You have a legitimate complaint in saying this diet is too severe. There's no way that anybody's going to follow that. But there's 2 maxims that I use that makes it easier to follow. First of all, everything in moderation. MSG and citric acid are okay if you don't overdo it. Sometimes citric acid is used to stabilize the food and it's there in very low quantity. That's fine. You're not going to be bothered by it. Sugar is addicting. I've been off sugar for more than 30 years and I still walk to the refrigerator and open it up and look in and see if there's some sugar there. And I know there isn't because I've thrown it all out, because if I didn't, I would eat it. So sugar is the only thing that you really have to watch for. The MSG you can get around, and the citrus you can just kind of stay away from things that taste citrusy. The second maxim is that God is perfect, we're not. And in other words, I don't want you to strive for the perfect diet. Simply strive so that you don't get into symptoms. I, in my practice, had many patients who were compulsively followers of anything I said. And that worried me a lot, because eventually if they really tried to follow the diet too hard and didn't see a reward for it, they'd stop it and not go back to it. And I always felt more comfortable with ones that I knew would cheat, because they'll cheat and they'll find out, oop, got into trouble on that, and then they'll go back to it again until a month later where they might cheat again. But they can carry that on for years, and that's why don't try for a perfect diet. Just settle your symptoms. That by itself is enough. Now, there will be people who won't agree with that, but that's my thought very much. Otherwise, I don't think you would follow it. Okay, guidelines. Your genes and age determine if you're mildly or severely affected. I am severely affected. I should have been dead by 50 or 60 years of age. And I was lucky, actually lucky in 2 things. One is I have a abdominal aneurysm, and they found that, and it was asymptomatic. And if I hadn't found it, I would have been dead years ago. But the second thing is that when I was in my 40s, I weighed 245 pounds, which is a lot. And I said, I don't have the willpower to stop or to follow a whole diet, but I can do one thing. And I said, okay, what was that one thing? I said, okay, I'll take out sugar out of my diet. Not thinking at all about the brain, because that was well before I ever thought about foods and how they affected the brain. And over the period of years, I have lost 100 pounds. But it also means for me to get Alzheimer's or dementia and have that catastrophe happen to me when I was introduced as a speaker, in the absence of sugar, means that I had to be awfully sensitive, because I didn't eat much in the way of MSG or citrus. That was very low in the diet. But I knew that when I ran into that problem that I had to get even better, because it was enough to make me go bad. So your genes and age determine if you're mildly or severely affected. Young people just aren't affected because their genes have not aged. The genes that allow you to eat foods without worry. And the symptoms that people suffer are the infirmity of aging, such as tiredness, poor sleep, bloating, weight gain, falling, weakness, headaches, That's the reason I called them the aging chemicals, but because I think that people who have those infirmities don't need to have them if they would follow a diet that prevented that from happening. But whatever you do, if you decide that you have symptoms that may be caused by these foods, start out by following a diet that lets you know whether that's true or not. Now, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, that Alzheimer's disease is fading. And I've seen in a number of articles, it both looked at and also referenced. A national study in the JAMA Internal Medicine, November 2016, so a pretty near one, shows that dementia is decreasing in incidence. And at the same time that we get this decrease, Alzheimer's susceptible people now have stopped avoiding fat and are avoiding MSG and sugar instead of fat. And what's happening is that they're being very effective and they're slowing this thing down. So ordinary people are defeating Alzheimer's disease. And I had, to give a small confirmation, this isn't a large one, but I was at a lecture given by Jerry Hammer, who is the general manager of the Minnesota State Fair. And he just happened to say it toward the end of his talk, which was fascinating. And if you ever get a chance to listen to him, do so. He's a wonderful person and a fascinating speaker. He said that he has so many people who are very interested in the impact of food on their health. That's what I think is causing Alzheimer's to decrease in frequency. So I talked to him afterward, and he said, yes, that's true. They are becoming more knowledgeable. We've now started to say that sugar and MSG are not good products to have, not in excess. To go further, my point in having this book and this talk is not to force you in any direction, but to give you enough information that you can use it to determine your own way of life. And then you don't need me to stop Alzheimer's. You do need the information that I can give you. And once I've given it to you, you can take care of yourself. Now, there is one extra thing that I'm delighted, it just happened recently, that went right along with what we talked about here. And that's Alzheimer's disease will fade further. And that's, I heard that Tom Brady, the winning quarterback of the Super Bowl, had a special diet that he attributed this diet to the fact that he's still playing at 39. I put his age as 40 because I'll be using it when he's 42, this slide. And his diet avoids sugar, MSG, and citric acid. And also, I think another thing is, and I didn't note at that time, I think he also avoids fruit. He does not have much fruit because fruit is really candy. It has some helpful things in it, but it's full of citrus, it's full of sugar, it's worrisome. And then the article I read was out of Eat This, Not That of February of this year. And he's told the author, or the person who wrote the article, that when I was 25, I was hurting all the time, and now at 39, my arm never hurts and my body never hurts. Which I see instances, or in the articles I've collected, I have seen reference to this, that the people who are following these diets and who are avoiding these foods are acting and feeling so much younger. Their pain is down. And I think of all the poor people who have bad backs and other pains and say, gee, I wonder if they would try this, if that wouldn't work. I know for myself that I feel, I'm not 39, but I feel even younger than that because I just feel that way. It just, a lot of things that had bothered me before, as long as I followed this diet, they're no longer bothering me. So I know he is just one person, but he's a person that agrees with me, and I think it's wonderful. Please take away these thoughts with you. I've spent years of studying patient care and personal experience with my own dementia to develop this treatment to stop the aging chemicals from hurting you. This treatment led me along the only path I know that climbs out of dementia's swamp. To follow my path, you must know what I know. Retaining the mind, its information supplements the information I gave you today. Then reread it. Help me to spread the knowledge of this treatment. You may know groups who would profit from this information. For the Good Samaritans treating the unfortunates, activities, loving care, and medication for dementia will ultimately fail if the afflicted continues to consume beyond tolerance the aging chemicals. It's like painting a wet wall. You might get the paint up, but by the next day it's down again. It's not effective, not as effective as changing the diet. Finally, for those who will not now follow my treatment, if your symptoms worsen, you may need to do so in the future. For you, my path to treatment remains open. I know that happened to me really frequently when I was in practice, that I would talk to people and I could see it in their face that they would not be following it. And sometimes they're honest enough to say, doctor, I can't follow that. But give them 2 years and 2 more years of symptoms and they will come back and they said, we followed it and it really worked. And this might also happen to you. Thank you for coming. I enjoyed it.